Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called An Unfortunate Collision, written by Penguiator. Sam was a creature of very few words. Fittingly, his job was one that had a rather severe lack of contact with other sentients. Hyperway shipping. This was generally acceptable to Sam, as he was happiest with a cup of warm bray, a collection of works of Maine, and a hollow chamber set to his favourite setting, a tent and a light drizzle. It was here that Sam was relaxing when he heard the warp drive shift. Sam frowned. There was no reason for there to be any change in the configurations during the entire haul, and it had never before, so Sam was obviously not the happiest holographic camper. He quickly closed the hologram, turning the soft forest into a white room again, and ran to the bridge. As he jumped into the worn chair, he noticed that the ship's proximity warning light was flashing. How strange, Sam thought. Sam was very right to be confused, as those lights only warned of nearby structures when a pilot was guiding his ship for a landing, and nothing would ever be close enough for the sensors to be triggered while the ship was in hyperspace and deep space. At least, that's what the ship's manual had said when Sam was assigned to it. To be fair, the writers of the ship's manual, titled Freight Cruisers Anew, the 112, could not be blamed for not predicting that was about to happen to Sam. Hyperway shipping, being 90 years old, was still in its infancy, and the only recorded prediction of what Sam was about to go through was in a science fiction book published about 3 years ago. As Sam settled in his chair and surveyed the array of normal readouts, the second proximity light began flashing. Then the third. Suddenly all 6 sensors flashed, and Sam grew quite annoyed. "What are you, cop?" Ugh! Sam felt a familiar kick of his gut shifting as he was pulled out of hyperspace. But this time, it was 100 times worse. Sam could feel the warp drive straining as the bubble of space-time that the freighter was constrained in began to collapse. The last thing that Sam managed to think of as the space-time that made him was twisted and snapped. How ironic it was that his last thing he said wasn't even a word. People always told him he was a creature of very few words. The Galactic Transit Authority, after noticing that half of an asteroid belt was missing, quickly cordoned off the accident site, blacklisting it on all navigational computers. This took them a shocking 5 weeks. Most license approvals averaged a year and a half in processing, so people were generally quite impressed with how seriously the GTA was taking this incident. Most political pundits believed that the sudden and catastrophic failure of a perfectly good warp drive on a tried-and-true shipping freighter was due to sabotage, and that there was something more valuable on board than some toaster ovens and a couple antique holodiscs of the battles of the Banfer. The more radical of the news outlets claimed that the speed of the response was because it was a precursor to another strong arm by the Crystallia, and, as usual, amassed their following of stay-at-home parents with too much time and not enough intelligence. Either way, the opinion of the masses was that there was a cover-up. As a random Magian off the street would put it, the damn government is hiding shit from us, as usual. I pay my taxes, and I say I have a right to know everything that happens in this godforsaken sector. The truth was significantly less exciting. In reality, the GTA had no idea what was going on, and despite the initial rapid response, was too far up their own arse in bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo to figure it out. After the initial investigation files were produced, they were passed around from paw to tentacle for about a month before finally ending up on Greety's intern's desk. Greetus, being the typical intern with a hodgepodge of having too much time on his hands and never being told anything productive to use it on, immediately devoted all of his full energy to the file. He hoped that he could produce something worthwhile. Someone would notice, and he might be awarded with a paid internship the following cycle, or even a full-time position. After spending about another month of work and time on the file, except for when he had to pick up the officer's praise order, Greetus finally had something to show for it. On a certain Sunday morning, Greetus slowly slithered into the mass fabricator room. After checking that no one was there, as the interns were only technically authorized to do basic maintenance on the machine, Greetus inserted his holodisk into the import port and quickly started the program. 17 hours later, it was done. A full-scale recreation of the object that had managed to completely scramble the warp drive of freighter 1999-203, Model 112. Greetus had passed out around hour 16, as most sentients found even staying up for 10 hours difficult. He was found in the morning by a very irritated tech, who wrote him up, recorded what Gretus had done in great detail in HR report number 10002394. Despite not seeming very fortuitous to Gretus, that HR report was possibly the best thing to happen to the newly recreated object. Much like anywhere else, incentives are not very prominent on the list of importance at the EGTA, but discipline was. The report quickly shot up to the head of Galactic Transit Authority, who demanded that the new object be studied to excruciating detail. When asked about what should be done to Gretus, the bureaucrat simply asked, "Who?" Intense study of the object revealed that it was actually a space probe. After decoding all of the stored data and transmission on the craft, it was determined that this probe, Voyager 1, originated from a yet undiscovered species called humans. The reason that Voyager 1 was so catastrophic to freighter 1999-203 was because it happened to be transmitting exactly the right frequency and pattern to destabilize the freighter's warp drive. The GTA took great pride in claiming that they had discovered a new sentient species, as it was incredibly rare that anyone would find a species before they achieved FTL travel, and this accomplishment was touted across the Confederation. Gretus received another stern talking to and was put on probation for unauthorized use of equipment. Meanwhile, NASA had been quite confused for half a year, or so, when they suddenly stopped receiving transmissions from Voyager 1. It was immediately explained when the Confederation recon ship made contact with Earth by descending onto Las Vegas, passing, "Hello, humans! We have found your probe. We hope you are having a good day," as well as a collection of whale sounds that was on the disk contained in Voyager 1. This would have already been quite the confusing moment for most of humanity, and the whale sounds only seemed to make it worse. This all coupled with the fact that the Corvette appeared just under 100 miles away from Area 51 meant that whatever was happening in Vegas was most definitely not going to stay in Vegas. After some explanations and a passing out of many translators, the situation became clear. The various governments of Earth decided to unite under a more cohesive United Nations, though they obviously couldn't help but continue spying on each other, and the sharing of knowledge began in earnest. Thankfully, the United Nations was very efficient at adopting the new spacefaring technology to which they had been exposed, as all of the species in the Confederation found it quite difficult to even walk on Earth. What with its high gravity, crushing air pressure, and low oxygen levels. The few ambassadors that had originally landed in Las Vegas had also felt the heat to be quite disturbing, to say the least. Zahid Yorvak was one of those ambassadors. However, after just 10 weeks dealing with the humans, their unusual hell of a planet was the least of his concerns. He was more impressed with how readily they were adapting into their situation. Even for sentients that achieved FTL travel autonomously and found the Confederation first, it usually takes months, years even, for them to truly begin to accept the sudden broadening of their horizons. Yet the United Nations, within a short span of a few months, was already taking initiative without much prompting. In fact, one of their recent designed spaceships was about to dock with a Confederation diplomatic vessel. Zahid absent-mindedly rubbed one of his ears, mentally steeling himself for the negotiations that were about to proceed. Negotiations between sentients always took years, and sometimes creating a resolution was the life work of a politician. Nevertheless, Zahid knew that he would come on top. After all, the difference in knowledge and experience was simply unbeatable. As species were generally cooperative with themselves, sapiens always lacked the negotiating skills that were needed for interspecies intergalactic bartering. The Costalia ambassador was taken out by his subduper by the flare of rudimentary Hyperion thrusters casting a curve of the blue planet. The humans were here. As Zahid stood watching the United Nations vessel draw closer, he began to feel uneasy. "It's rather large, isn't it?" he thought to himself. "And what are those on top of it?" The vessel grew closer and closer, revealing itself to be at least the size of a cruiser. Zahid's anxiety grew further and further, culminating when he realized what the massive shapes on the top of the ship were. Guns. Specifically, they looked like mass drivers. Zahid ran to the bridge, frantically scrambling up to the ornate steps of the diplomatic vessel. "We're under attack," he screamed as he burst onto the command deck. "Why are we not running?" "Nothing we can do. They would catch us immediately, and we obviously have no weapons ourselves, being a diplomatic vessel and all," replied Captain Emmerite. She was in the process of bucking on her ceremonial scimitar. Obviously, she had realized that they were about to be captured before Zahid did. "We saw the guns as soon as they crested the horizon. I had hoped that their size was a malfunction on our scanners, But as you can see, I was wrong. My apologies. We blocked communications as soon as we realized that we were in combat, so they won't be able to trace the location of the main fleet. But this ship is lost. Zahid was in shock.
There is no reason why they would declare war now. Are they insane?
It's a new species, and one that formed on a Category 14 at that, Captain Emmerite stated matter-of-factly. You can never predict what they might do. The Cretans thought of the Confederation was an asteroid the first time we met. Suddenly, the ship shook. Looks like they've managed to board us. Mind if you come with me to deliver our surrender? You are the ambassador, after all. I'm sure they would want to talk to you. Not waiting for a response, Captain Emmerite strode off, and Zahid scrambled after her. The duo quickly made their way down to airlock 4, closely tailed by Emmerite's personal guard. The captain faced the airlock door with perfect military posture, and the ambassador attempted to do the same. Bang, bang, psst. The airlock door slowly swung open, depressurizing. A team of humans wearing military gear strode in, looking ready to kill. Zahid gulped. Sapient on sapient violence rarely occurred, as the thought of violence was generally enough to make a sapient puke. But for some reason he believed that these soldiers were capable of it. Then they started laughing. At least, that's what his translator told him. Their breathless grunts were. "You're clear to enter now, sir," one of them called into the airlock. "Wonderful," came the reply, accompanied by footsteps. "I suppose that our worst-case scenario is just a precaution after all." A rather familiar human female strode into the atrium. She did not wear any military armor, nor was she taller than any of the human soldiers, but she radiated authority that Zahid had rarely seen before. Seeing Zahid, she smiled. Ambassador Yeovak, it's good to finally meet you face to face, not behind one of your holoscreens. I trust we'll have much to discuss. It finally clicked why she was familiar to Zahid. It was Samantha Crawford, the representative of the United Nations he had been working with through the low-res holoscreen. Zahid cleared his suddenly hoarse throat. Ambassador Crawford. Don't tell me you didn't recognize me, Ambassador Yeovak. First, we can't establish communications through your ship, and now you're looking at me as though you've seen death. If I didn't know better, I would think that you were trying to avoid me. Samantha's voice carried a hint of joviality that was not consistent with the fear that Zahid was feeling. You were not seizing control of the ship? The ship? You mean your ship? Of course not. Why would you think that? We arrived exactly when scheduled from the vector that we had planned and docked at the airlock we had agreed upon. Did we do anything improper? We did have trouble establishing communication, so we couldn't verify the docking. So the armed entry was just in case something had happened to you. Zahid felt his fear give way to anger. You arrived in a warship, with guns large enough to disintegrate us. Zahid attempted to calm himself. Bringing weapons is enough to declare your intentions for most civilized sapiens. Perhaps you weren't aware of this, but that cruiser is basically a declaration of war. I apologize. Us humans are loath to go anywhere unfamiliar without protection, stated Ambassador Crawford. Why don't we brush this aside as a cultural difference it is, and proceed with our discussions? Zahid felt his nerves settle. That would be quite desirable. Let me show you to the conference area. As the entourage walked back into the spaceship, Zahid was glad to categorize the recent event as a result of human stupidity. However, in his subconscious, he was still afraid. Afraid of how the humans had managed to create such a large warship in a few months. Yes, but more so afraid of what he had seen in the human soldiers. Their eyes were covered, but he could see it. The predatory glare, the bloodlust that they switched off when they'd realized there was nothing to kill. That spark of determination and intelligence and a perfect mix of lethality. Zahid reasoned it was a trick of the light, but deep down, he knew better. And if he didn't, he was about to find out. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.